Channel 5's Pauletta Longo, keeping you in touch. From ABC News. This week with David Brinkley. Now, from our Washington headquarters, here's David Brinkley.
It did seem the recession was ending, if slowly. Shoppers were beginning to buy. Applications for unemployment pay were declining. Exports were rising. The economic numbers were not great, but pretty good. Certainly better. And then, bang, this week, a nasty surprise. New figures. They showed a substantial rise in unemployment, up to 7.8%, the highest in 8 years. Just when it was thought we had got past all of that, President Bush was stunned. This will hurt him politically. It may hurt all the candidates. Why is this happening, or still happening? What is causing it? What can we do about it? We will ask today's guests, the Secretary of the Treasury, Nicholas Brady, Richard Darman, Director, White House Office of Management and Budget, Robert Reich of the Kennedy School of Government and Economic Advisor to Governor Clinton, some background from our man John Martin, and our discussion here with George Will, Cokie Roberts, and Clarence Page, all here on our Sunday program. First, a little news since the Sunday morning papers. President Bush, on his way to the economic summit in Munich, stopped in Warsaw, Poland, to deliver the remains of Jan Paderewski to the Polish people. Paderewski was a great pianist and a Polish patriot who died in the United States during World War II. President Roosevelt said his remains would be kept here until Poland was free again. ABC's Britt Hume in Warsaw.
The president was making only a 5-hour stopover in Warsaw, taking part in the long-delayed funeral mass for the Polish statesman and musician Paderewski. His body was brought home a week ago to a free Poland, 51 years after he died in exile in the U.S. The overall purpose of this visit was to buck up the Eastern European country that has taken the boldest steps and is now feeling the greatest pain on the road to a market economy. But in his first meeting with President-elect Wałęsa, the president's aide said he sternly lectured Wałęsa about trade concessions Poland has granted to the European Economic Community, which Mr. Bush complained were unfair to the U.S. Publicly, though, there was no hint of this in anything Mr. Bush said. The message instead was of American desire to help Poland in what the president called its time of trial and to encourage the Poles not to turn back.
America wants Poland to succeed and to prosper, and America wants Poland now and forever to be free.
Mr. Bush did bring with him a modest plan to help Poland, about $200 million earlier committed to stabilize the country's currency, which he said could now be used for other purposes. He said he would urge the other nations at the economic summit this week to make similar commitments. Britt Hume, ABC News, Warsaw.
Boris Yeltsin of Russia will be in Munich after the economic summit and was saying his country would refuse to take an aid package from the West if, as he put it, it allowed the Western countries to, quote, force us to our knees, unquote. Yeltsin said money from the West should not be considered charity because most of it would be used to repay loans, many of them to Germany. In the U.S. government, there is the question, should America pay Russia's debt to Germany? We'll be back with all the rest of today's program in a moment.
This week with David Brinkley, brought to you by GE. From plastics to financial services, we bring good things to life. And by ADM, supermarket to the world.
This is the hand that turned on the light, that lit up the desk where the idea was born for a quieter jet engine that flew the technician who works at the power plant, which produces its energy far more efficiently as it lights up the city and powers the hospital with its life-saving images where Sam was found healthy, in time for the game, held under the lights and broadcast to millions by a satellite system, designed with precision and shipped by powerful locomotives that passed by a factory that helped build a car with advanced thermoplastics that sits in the drive at the home of Patricia, who went to the fridge and got a drink for her dad, who works in the room where he turns out the light as he puts his young daughter to bed.
Every day, GE technology touches the lives of just about everybody.
A great many Americans, working and not working, were uneasy this week at the news of rising unemployment. Many said they wondered if they themselves would be caught in another wave of layoffs. Also uneasy with the Bush administration, since it had been counting on an improved economy and improved employment to help in its re-election. This week's economic news will not help. Some background on all this from John Martin. John?
The mood of America, small town and big, this 4th of July weekend, David, is a strange mixture of hope and fear. As they left work this past week, everyone from the man in the White House to the men and women in the streets felt a bit uneasy. The unemployment rate had just jumped to its highest percentage in 8 years, and employers had just eliminated 117,000 jobs in a single month. The Federal Reserve Bank decided to lower the cost of borrowing money for the banks. This raised hopes of stimulating business activity, but raised fears, too, of a misunderstanding.
It runs the risk of scaring people into thinking that these employment figures are really worse than they really are, or they might signify the start of another downturn, and that in turn could have a negative effect on confidence.
It's real scary. It's like as bad as it is, it's almost the quiet before the storm that's coming, because I think it's going to get worse.
Jerry Wiley didn't see how it could get worse as he walked into the state employment office in Atlanta this week. Wiley retired 4 years ago from the Air Force, took a job at half his $40,000 Air Force salary, worked his way back up to it, then watched it vanish in a cutback. He looked around and was shocked.
Some of the pay was just terrible. I couldn't believe. For somebody with a master's degree and 23 years of management experience, they wanted to pay me $16,000 a year to start. That's ridiculous.
Fred Thompson is a store manager who has been looking for work for 10 months.
It's tough sitting here in an unemployment office thinking, gee, I'm a good guy. I should be somewhere working, making money. This is the first time in my life, and I'm 37, that being a good guy and having a good education just wasn't good enough. And I've found a lot of good guys have been in the same boat as me.
This past week, the demand dropped still further. Aetna Insurance, in an industry once believed mostly immune to the economy, Aetna Insurance said it is laying off 4,800 workers. In manufacturing, Hughes Aircraft said it will lay off 9,000 workers. Carrie Manos is a Hughes scientist who kept her job, but her husband has seen the writing on the wall.
My husband was an engineer at Rockwell up until 3 months ago. And as a result of these kinds of things, he's made a big career change. He's now a commercial fisherman in Alaska.
The threat of losing jobs is affecting more than just career decisions. It is forcing people to spend less and fear more.
I think worry is part of the problem, and they're probably worried for good reason. I don't think it's an irrational worry. I think they see a government that doesn't seem to have any strong sense of direction or any leadership on the economy.
Two prospective presidents say they will lead.
We're going to have to settle down here, folks. We're going to have to cut out a lot of this wasteful spending. We're going to have to balance the budget, or we have to pay our bills.
My plan is a bold plan. It offers $50 billion in new investments over the next 4 years in each of the next 4 years.
Unless the economy is perceived as improving this year, analysts say, the president could be beaten in November, even though many economists concede that the business cycle, not the president, largely controls the economy.
Let's face it, we have grown to have this perception that Washington can do everything and that presidents can do everything. It works to their advantage when things are going well, but it has a downside. And now you can't get out there and say, don't blame me, I'm not the one in charge.
But that is what the Bush administration said this week. It said, blame Congress.
If they do nothing, then they're going to have to go home and answer to the American people.
The president called the perception of economic paralysis a mirage. The economy is growing, he said. The confusion is coming from the media.
Endless polls, weird talk shows, crazy groups every Sunday telling you what you think.
2 days later, the unemployment figures were bad news, he said, but better times are ahead. What the polls suggest is that many people aren't sure.
It seems like in the polls they're not voting for him, or they're not going to vote for him, so I think that's a clear indication that he needs to do a better job, or we need to get someone else.
Some, facing layoffs, have a remedy.
Is it going to affect your voting at all? What's happening to you?
Yes, it's going to affect my voting. We need a change, complete change.
It's too simple to say that this election is only about jobs, George Bush's job come January, the jobs of other Americans. But because presidents have been pretending for years that they can control the economy, whoever gets the credit also gets the blame. And that is what the man who lives here is getting right now. David?
John, thank you. Now, coming next is the Secretary of the Treasury, Nicholas Brady, who is in Warsaw, Poland, on his way to the Economic Summit in Munich. Mr. Secretary, good morning. How are you?
Good morning, Dave. Good morning, David. Fine.
Good. Nice to have you. Now,
thank you.
This week we have had some rather startling economic news, and I'd like to hear your and the President's reaction to it. The rather substantial increase in unemployment. What do you make of that?
Well, it's obviously unfortunate, David, that the employment data has gone up. I would point out that that does not mean that economic growth in the country has stopped. The first quarter was a very robust 2.7%. Nobody is suggesting that we won't have a reasonable growth in the second quarter. It may not be as fast as the first, but it's going to continue. And it's hoped that if we can continue to produce growth rates of this level, that the employment rate will start down again.
Well, to a non-economist, Mr. Secretary, I don't understand this. How, if the economy is growing, unemployment is rising? How does that work?
Because at this particular juncture, you have people coming into the workforce at a faster rate than jobs are being provided. For instance, kids coming out of school, housewives going back to work who are worried about adding to their own family income. So it's a question of more people coming into the workforce than jobs being provided. I would point out that there were 800,000 jobs created since the 1st of January this year, so we're moving forward.
Now, you're on your way to Munich to a summit of the 7 richest nations in the world, including ours, of course. What might we expect to come out of that?
Well, I think several things. First of all, for the first time in over a year, all 3 of the major countries, Japan, Germany, and the United States, will be talking about measures to institute growth. In the United States, we have a growing economy. Of course, the discount rate went down on Friday, so Thursday, that's a good thing. In Japan, they're talking about increasing their fiscal stimulus some 7 trillion yen, which will be an enormous help to the Japanese economy. In Germany, the thought there is, in order to lower interest rates in the next several months, that the government of Germany would make sure they capped their fiscal expenditures and gave the private sector more of a chance.
Mr. Secretary, does all of this economic problem in our country and in others, Japan and most of West Europe and so on, is the recession continuing?
Well, the recession is not continuing in the United States. As I say, we had growth in the first quarter, and we will have growth in the second.
But the rest
of the world, the interest rates in Germany have a depressing effect on the whole of Europe, and the Germans understand that, and so do the other countries, and they want to do something about it. So the first step is to get things under control in Germany, and the Germans think they have that underway.
Mr. Secretary, do we, meaning the United States, have any new economic ideas to offer to the summit in Munich?
Well, I think the main idea, David, is the one that we've been pushing, which is that world growth is productive of jobs, which is what every country wants. Growth also provides the funds to get the necessary projects underway that create growth, jobs, and investment. So I think for the first time in the year, instead of arguing about that, it's enthusiastically accepted by all 7 participants at the summit.
Well, that's a first, if that happens. Anyway.
Well, it is.
Good. All right, Mr. Secretary, thank you. Thanks very much for talking with us, and good luck in Munich.
You bet, David.
Coming next, Robert Reich, an economic advisor to Governor Clinton, and Richard Darman, director of the Office of Management and Budget. In a moment.
But I could not believe it when I ate it. They're just absolutely wonderful.
I've learned to like them quite a bit. We take them home and eat them pretty regularly.
They were really delicious. I like them. They're just good. Oh, they'd get a 10 for sure.
They're talking about it in the Midwest.
It's quick, I know it's nutritious. It's going to be good for me. And Bob has a high cholesterol problem, so they really solve a lot of problems for our whole family.
And soon it may be in the lips of people everywhere.
If he says it's good, it is really good.
Yeah, I like them.
It's the Midland Harvest brand Harvest Burger, an all-vegetable patty from the Archer Daniels Midland Company. Harvest Burgers are low in fat, low in calories, free of cholesterol, and contain dietary fiber. Qualities that are in growing demand by today's health-conscious consumers. And what are people saying about the taste? We couldn't have said it better ourselves. ADM, supermarket to the world.
Risk. As hard as it is to live with, it's impossible to live without. At Merrill Lynch, we know that risk can be dealt with. It can be managed. It can even be turned to your advantage. To do that, you need a partner. A partner who understands it and can help you turn a world of risk into a world of opportunity. Merrill Lynch, we're bullish on the future.
Introducing United Airlines' renowned international service to cities throughout Latin America. Come fly the airline that's uniting the world. Come fly the friendly skies.
It's time to face the future, because today's issues will shape tomorrow. Let's face it, the future is in our hands. Peter Jennings, David Brinkley, the Democratic Convention with ABC News. It matters.
Mr. Reich, thank you for being with us this morning. Pleased to have you.
Good to be here, David.
Here in the studio with us are George Will and Cokie Roberts, both of ABC News. Now, Mr. Reich, we've all heard a number of opinions about the drop in employment or the rise in unemployment in the last, Thursday. What do you make of that?
Well, David, the very least one can make of it, it's certainly not good news. In June, we had a terrible month. Now, the economy was creating about 80 to 90,000 new jobs a month, beginning in January. But in June, something very different happened. We lost approximately 117,000 jobs. And that's very bad news. It's bad news not only for the economy, it's bad news for George Bush, because it means that this recovery, although it was very anemic to begin with, even though it's anemic, it is running out of steam. Now, I'm not so pessimistic as to think that we're going into a so-called triple dip, that we're going into another recession, but I don't see any buoyant recovery coming out of the current economic morass, at least for the next 6 to 8 or 12 months.
Now, you are at the moment a consultant to the Clinton campaign. How would you have him react to this? He's running for office. The politician's ability to affect the economy is quite limited, as we know.
Well,
so what would you say?
David, there are two very different things. Bill Clinton has already put out an economic growth plan. In fact, I think he's the only candidate, declared or undeclared, to come out with a plan. It's an investment plan. The economy right now in the United States is suffering from two very different problems. They're related, but they are different. One is the recession, unemployment, a very sluggish recovery, as we just talked about. The second is a long-term growth problem. Going back really over the last 12 years, growth has not been what it should be. We have not, as an economy, experienced rising living standards, even if we had jobs. In fact, one of the most staggering data to come out of the Labor Department over the past couple of years is that we now have 18% of our full-time workers in the United States are living under the poverty line. In other words, even though they have jobs, they are under the poverty line. Those are not good jobs. Governor Clinton has come out with a plan to invest in education and training and rebuild America. My advice to him, and in fact, I don't even think he needs this advice, I think he's already working on this, is to accelerate some of that plan, to front-load it, so that the minute he takes office, should he take office in January, next January, he can stimulate the economy right away. Now, it's true, as you said, governments can't do everything, but governments can do something. And right now, government is doing absolutely nothing.
Governor Clinton has been advertised as a new kind of Democrat, and as you say, he's been very forthcoming about his plans. His plans, however, look to some people familiar. Cut defense, raise taxes, $200 billion of spending over a 4-year period. His plan for balancing the budget calls for half the reductions in outlays to come from a chimera called management savings. And his collapse of the deficit by 1/2 is actually projected from the Congressional Budget Office to happen even if nothing is done as a result of economic growth and reduced spending on the S&L bailout. What's new?
George, what's new is this. Number one, that $200 billion of spending is spending that is more properly called investment.
Why is it more proper? Excuse me. Let me ask that, because we're going to hear a lot of that from the Clinton campaign. Investment, is that not a synonym for spending?
Let me explain. Investment is very different from spending. In fact, the problem with the United States economy is that we've been consuming like mad, both public and private sector. We have not been investing in the future. When I talk about investment, I mean an investment in education or training or infrastructure that helps the economy grow in the future. But in the new global, George, just let me finish this point, because in the new global economy, there are only 2 factors of production that are relatively immobile internationally. Everything else is mobile. Money now sloshes across borders. Factories, equipment can go anywhere. Corporations are also global. There are 2 unique factors of production that are relatively uniquely important for our future standard of living. One is our people. That is their education, their training, their skills, their ability to be productive in the future. The second are the infrastructure. It's an ugly word, but I'm talking about roads and bridges and sewage treatment facilities, everything that supports our people. Those are the investments of the future. If a nation is not making those investments in people and infrastructure, that nation is not going to have a future economy. That's what the Clinton plan is all about.
I got you. Now, investment is good spending and spending is bad spending, but everybody in Washington says that their subsidy is an investment in a better America. Can you give me an example of what Mr. Clinton considers mere spending, that is, spending that's not an investment in the future?
Well, in fact, the plan has about $100 billion worth of spending cuts.
Primarily defense and intelligence.
And, well, a lot of defense, primarily defense. The defense cuts would be more than the Bush administration wants to cut. Right now, we ought to be moving from a defense to a civilian commercial economy. In fact, it makes a lot of sense. Instead of spending money building more guns, we ought to build better schools. National security in the future has much more to do with an educated workforce than it does with national defense as we used to understand it. Secondly, the sources of funding for education and training and roads and bridges will come not only from national defense cuts, but also from increasing taxes on the top 2% of Americans. And don't forget, these are the people who made out like bandits in the 1980s.
I'm glad you brought that up, because Professor Reich, one of the things we've heard a lot about in this campaign is that no politician is saying to the American people that they have to make hard choices, that they can't have it all, that they can't have a balanced budget and continue the spending and not have taxes. Well, who are you telling, other than millionaires, that they have to make hard choices? Where are the hard choices in your economic plan?
Cokie, it's not just millionaires. People in the top 2%, that means families with average income of $200,000 above, individual workers $150,000, they have not paid their fair share.
So is that it for hard choices?
Wait. The tax burden has been shifted away from them, and also over the last 10 years, they have got about 70% of all of the increase in national income. If you tell the average working American, you've got to sacrifice more, that average working American says appropriately, wait a minute, my taxes have already gone up, I'm paying more in Social Security, state sales taxes, property taxes have gone up, I am paying more than I've ever paid before and getting less for it. It seems to me, and again, this is Robert Reich talking, this isn't Governor Bill Clinton, it seems to me that what we need to do, besides moving from a defense economy to a education and infrastructure economy, is also finance that more fairly. And fairness is something that we've lost sight of over the last 10 years.
So the hard choices are only at the top of the ladder?
The hardest choices are at the top of the ladder. And now there's some additional choices. Bill Clinton feels very strongly that if you are going to college and you are getting some federal support, you're going to have to pay your way. If you are an absent parent, you're going to have to provide child support. If you are a student In high school, you are going to have to maintain a certain grade point average. In fact, in Arkansas, they took away driver's licenses of people that didn't. There are all kinds of ways in which you can ask the average American, if the average American gets some help with education and health care and infrastructure, to come back and say, yes, I'm going to do my bit as well.
But he has pulled back on the middle-class tax cut that he proposed earlier in the campaign.
The middle-class
Is there a choice here that he seems to have lined up on the side of the people who say it's better to keep the money in the hands of government to spend it rather than give it to the people to spend it?
Well, it's not so much giving it to the people. We have had now 10 years of trickle-down economics. In fact, the Reagan and Bush administration, the Bush administration still subscribes to the same principle. You give people tax breaks at the top, and you hope that they're going to take their money and invest it, and all of that is going to trickle down to help everybody else. We now see that that doesn't work. We've had 11 years almost of that experiment, and we got half the bargain. But this was a middle-class tax cut we're talking about, not at the top. But yes, Bill Clinton is saying a middle-class tax cut in terms of achieving some degree of fairness, not as much of a tax cut for the middle class as he originally conceived, because once we got into the numbers, once we saw what it was going to require to develop a growth strategy for the United States in education and training and infrastructure, you can't do it all. You can't give everybody everything, but nevertheless, given the regressive shifts of the tax code over the last 10 years, you still appropriately, the middle class should get something.
Mr. Reich,
George, you've got a few seconds left.
The Democratic draft platform says the last 12 years have been 12 years a nightmare of Republican neglect, and that suggests insufficient spending on domestic affairs. Per capita outlays in the United States under Bush today are 29% higher than they were when Jimmy Carter came into office. Are you saying that Mr. Clinton would promise to have an even larger explosion of domestic spending than has occurred, in fact, under George Bush?
George, I think the big problem over the last 10 years, and this goes back to our little discussion over what is investment and what is consumption, education, training, skill development, roads, bridges, sewage treatment, all of the things that make an economy capable of being productive, more productive in the future, all of those have been cut by 1/3 over the last 10 years. Every other nation on earth is investing like mad, but we in the United States, we built up a huge military establishment. We have given all kinds of entitlements to people. We have not
Defense has been cut for 7 years now.
Yes. Are you telling me we can't cut more?
No, I'm saying that that's part of the problem.
We are well. Now wait a minute. We have had during the 1980s the greatest defense buildup in history.
I'm going to have to interrupt here. I'm sorry, Mr. Reich, because our time has simply run out, and we've run over already. But we do thank you for being with us.
Thanks very much.
Pleasure to have you. Coming next, Richard Darman, Director of President Bush's Office of Management and Budget. In a moment.
This Week with David Brinkley, brought to you by Merrill Lynch. We're bullish on the future.
As Nancy Walsh saves for her son's education, her savings and those of millions like her are invested in business. When business grows, our nation prospers and becomes more competitive in the world, which could open up a world of opportunities. And who will be there seeking out those opportunities for you and Nancy Walsh? Merrill Lynch. We're bullish on the future.
The diamond is a symbol of enduring quality. The same can be said for the Mitsubishi Diamante, an exquisite blend of luxury and performance. And for those who aspire to these special qualities, Mitsubishi offers these special leasing terms. Just $299 a month for 36 months with no down payment. The Diamante lease from Mitsubishi. The word is getting around.
This Week with David Brinkley will continue in a moment.
The World Economic Summit on the next Good Morning America, the President's mission in Munich.
Then exercise with punch, aerobic boxing here on Good Morning America.
When we see how a disaster can suddenly shatter the lives of those caught in its path, we have to help. That's our mission. In 2 years, the Red Cross has responded to more major disasters than ever in our history. We've helped thousands of people get back on their feet again. but we depleted our reserves. We must raise millions of dollars to help disaster victims this year. Perhaps we helped you once, or a friend or a neighbor. If disaster strikes, we'll be there. The Red Cross is not a government agency. We depend on voluntary contributions from people like you. Please help us today so no one is left helpless later. Support Red Cross Disaster Relief.
Channel 5's Gale Nye, keeping you in touch.
Mr. Darman, thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Pleased to have you, as we have often been in the past.
Nice to be here.
Now, you have a chance coming second to discuss your predecessor's economic plan, Mr. Clinton's economic plan, which, among much else, I believe, calls for increased taxes on the rich. That is the top 2% of the economic scale. And at one time, there was a plan for a tax cut for the middle class, which I believe has disappeared, right? What do you think of all this?
Well,
I mean, the Clinton economic plan. Are you ready to embrace it?
As you might guess, I'm not too enthusiastic about it. I heard your prior guest describe it as the only plan out there. I thought that was rather peculiar. It's a 22-page document, your audience might be interested to know, double-spaced, including charts. The president, of course, has a several thousand-page plan subject to serious scrutiny for over a year. This 22-page document is essentially a fraud. It's a joke. It's not a serious plan at all. It doesn't even reduce the deficit. It pretends to be a deficit-reducing plan. It relies on simply assuming favorable growth projections. It's bizarre. It used to be that deficit reduction would talk about cutting spending. It actually proposes to increase spending on their own numbers by $75 billion. And then it says for every dollar they're going to increase spending, they'd like to increase taxes $2 more. It's very hard to take it seriously. And it, ironically, or surprisingly, or somethingly, it is taken seriously by some editorial writers. This is peculiar.
Well, I'm not sure who they are, the editorial writers. Anyway, he's talking about the top 2%. That's people who make $100,000 a year and more. That would mostly be doctors, lawyers, professional people of various kinds, who now pay about 50% of their income in taxes. Whatever may have been said, that is the fact. Do you think that's enough? Do you want to raise it or do you want to cut it?
No, I don't think we should be raising taxes at this time or in the future.
You did once, to your regret, I believe.
Yes, actually, I've been associated with that several times, and tax cuts sometimes. But I don't think that people should be led to believe that there is such a thing as as an income tax increase for, quote, the rich, as if it would be only for the rich. There's very little money up there to be gained. And what happens is you legitimize a higher rate income tax system, and it's only a very short time between the time you raise taxes on, quote, the rich, and those same tax rates are brought down to the middle where all the money is. And that's not good for growth. It's not good for confidence. It's not good for anything in the economy at this stage or in the future.
I have here a 19-page document. This is the draft platform of the Democratic Party. Now, platforms are not written under oath, but here's what they say. President Bush has given America the slowest economic growth, the slowest income growth, and the slowest jobs growth since the Great Depression. That, I think, is true, is it not?
No, I think there's one thing wrong in that sentence that they ought to change. I'm glad to have an early chance to comment on it. I think they should say the Congress, the democratically controlled Congress, has failed to give the president the measures necessary to assure that this economy would grow.
A quibble, Darman. Under Bush's watch, in other words, that's basically true. Now, I'd like to ask you this. You've been here a long time. You were part of the Reagan boom, 18 million new jobs, more than Europe and Japan combined, and all the rest. Then Bush comes along. Now, the Democrats say the Reagan boom was a chimera, a Potemkin boom, and it was always rotten behind it, and all that's happening to Bush is not really Bush's fault. It's the whole 12 years is wrong. Is that the case? Were you the architect of the disaster as well as of the Bush program by participating in the Reagan boom? Did the boom produce the Bush problem?
No, I think not, and I don't know anyone who would like to go back and give up what was the longest period of peacetime growth in the country's history. We should all be thankful for the Reagan period of growth, the Reagan-Bush period of growth, and we should wish to get the economy growing again strongly in the same way in a second Bush term. You may recall that President Reagan in his first term had a deeper recession than we've had. And at that time, unemployment was even higher than it is now. And then following that, there was a a record period of growth. We can have that happen again. We should. But we need the president's program to be enacted, and we need a new Congress in order to get it enacted.
Let's take a look at the president's program. The president says government's too big, government is spending too much. But even if the Bush budget gets passed, and even if you discount, subtract S&L bailout spending, still, by Bush's own request to the Congress, domestic spending will have increased under Mr. Bush more than under Carter and Reagan combined, 12 years, and just 4 years here. It will have increased at a rate twice as fast as under Jimmy Carter and faster even than under Lyndon Johnson. Now, how do you explain this occurring under a conservative Republican administration and one that, for all its vetoes, does not veto spending bills?
Well, if I could take the liberty of repeating something I've said on this program before, but let me assure you it was actually interesting to the audience when I said it. 2/3 of the federal budget is not presented to the president for review. This shocks a lot of people. I made the point before, and I'd like to make again. That portion of the budget, which is called mandatory spending, grows and grows automatically without anybody's review. That's outrageous. It's scandalous. It should come up for review. It should come up for reform. The president has proposed to cap the growth of that spending. If you could cap that growth so that it just grew for growth in the eligible population, the mandatory budget, and for inflation, you would actually save money. You'd save $2 trillion over the next 10 years. That's a phenomenal statistic.
Wait a second, Mr. Darman. The mandatory budget and the eligible population we're talking about here is primarily Social Security and Medicare.
No.
Yes.
No, a large portion is Social Security. A large portion is Medicare. Another large portion is Medicaid. But then there's a host of other programs,
much
student
small.
loan
I said
programs,
primarily.
farm programs,
By far the biggest aspects of them are Social Security and Medicare. So when you're talking about capping those things and talking about the eligible populations, what are you talking about? You're talking about cutting programs for old people?
Could I clarify something? Social Security used to be a large portion of the problem of growth of spending in the 70s and the 80s. Then it was growing more rapidly than the growth in eligible population and inflation. Now it isn't. Social Security is no longer contributing to the big growth, and we should leave Social Security alone. Medicare growth is much too rapid. Medicaid is much too rapid. But so, as I said before, is a whole host of other programs which should be cut first so that we don't have to do things that cut the benefits of older Americans.
But how far do you get when you do that?
You get some considerable distance. In fact, I'll share with you, but not with the audience who would be bored, a 30-page single-space document we have, which has a whole host of proposals in order to do that.
You have said now a couple of times on this program, the president, the vice president say repeatedly that everything would just be fine were it not for the Democratic Congress. Now, George has referred to your budget. The Republicans never vote for your budget when it comes to the Hill. So let's put aside the idea that Republicans would endorse your budget. Doesn't happen. But even given a theory that if a Congress and president were of the same party, that would be good for the American people. The fact that now 80% or more say the country is off on the wrong track, it looks like there's very certainly going to be a Democratic Congress come this election. Doesn't that argue more for electing a Democratic president if what you need is to have both branches in the same party's hands?
Well, let me call your attention to the one time we had a really significant spending reduction program enacted, and unfortunately it was a long time ago, in 1981. At that time, President Reagan did not enjoy control of the House of Representatives, but there were 192 Republicans and there were 67 conservatively oriented Democrats, and it was possible to put together a conservatively oriented majority to control the floor. I think after this next election, there will be, last time I was on this program, I think I said over 100 new members of Congress. I'm sure now there'll be over 125, perhaps substantially more than that, new members of Congress. Forget whether they're Democrats or Republicans. They will be able to think slightly differently, hopefully substantially differently than their predecessors. That creates an enormous opportunity to try to educate them, to try to persuade them that what the president wants to do is right. And whether they're Democrats or Republicans, it creates again the potential to get something done through the House.
First of all, at that time, you had a Republican Senate, which there's no indication you will have this time. Secondly, what happened as a result of those cuts that you put in place in 1981 was that 26 members of the House, Republican members of the House of Representatives lost in 1982. People didn't like those cuts.
No, that was the problem of the '82 recession and of a Social Security proposal which was misguided and which was withdrawn.
George, as I'm not very fond of saying, I say again, we have a few seconds.
Okay, enough of this retrospective cast of mind. We've now had the 7th cut in the discount rate by the Fed. What do you expect it to achieve in the next 2 or 3 months?
I would hope that it could help with confidence, but the Fed's action normally takes about 6 to 9 months to translate into the real economy. But I would hope it would help, that's right, but I would hope it would help with confidence because it's one of the things that's causing the economy to be as sluggish as it is. But for the long term, we need much more the reform program that the President has proposed, and yes, a new Congress.
Well, Mr. Darman, as you go forth to smite the political heathens, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for inviting me.
Come again. Coming next, our discussion here with everyone free to talk, but not all at once. And joining us will be Clarence Page, columnist for the Chicago Tribune. In a moment.
I have to cancel.
I keep canceling.
I have to cancel.
Why do you keep putting it off?
Mother, I'm not...
GE's breast cancer detection system.
I keep meaning to. Did you go? I'm too busy.
It can detect tumors too tiny to be felt.
It's such a busy week. I'm going to go next week.
I can't find the time.
I just haven't had time.
When?
It can help increase the survival rate to 91%.
I'll go when I have the time. Next week. Oh, I can't next week. Don't stop.
As soon as I can find the time, I'll go.
But there's one thing GE can't do. We can't make you go.
It's nothing to worry about. I just couldn't go.
Something is terribly wrong with these pictures, but you could look all day and not see it. The problem is carbon monoxide, an invisible, deadly pollutant emitted in auto exhaust. Fortunately, there's a way to help reduce these emissions. Ethanol, a renewable fuel derived from corn grown by the American farmer. And beginning November 1st, the Clean Air Act will require motor vehicles to use oxygenated fuels such as ethanol in 39 of the nation's most polluted cities during the 5 winter months. In 1988, when the program was introduced in the Denver area, atmospheric levels of carbon monoxide dropped 8% in the first 2 months. And this coming winter in Denver, the use of ethanol-blended fuels is expected to exceed 50% market share. So while the problem may be invisible, the solution is becoming clearer every day.
Now there are cars and trucks that run on clean-burning natural gas.
Yeah, but how clean can it be?
Natural gas reduces the emissions that cause smog by 80%.
Yeah, but what does it cost?
It's like saving 40 cents a gallon on gasoline.
Yeah, but where does it come from?
Natural gas comes from right here in North America.
Yeah, but who makes the vehicles?
America's automakers are turning out fleets of natural gas cars and trucks.
Yeah, but do they come with tinted windows?
Monday, honor the best in the business. Bob Saget hosts a tribute to this year's hottest athlete. The Jim Thorpe Pro Sports Awards, Monday.
We're in the middle of a political campaign that has often been described in the last month or so as bizarre. I guess maybe it is. I've never seen a campaign like it. Have you? Any of you? I know you haven't because I've been around as long as anybody. There hasn't been one. We got us there. Somebody who zoomed in suddenly out of left field, fangs bared, running for president, and either tied or leading all of the others. It's kind of... By the way, President Bush referred to, I don't quite know whom, but he said all these crazy, was it crazy? Weird talk shows and crazy groups every Sunday.
Right.
Telling everybody what to think.
We think he means George.
Guilty. Well, I don't know. We might all plead guilty. And we'll hang separately or together, as Benjamin Franklin said. Anyway, what do you make of this crazy campaign? It's now, the last poll I saw has all three about tied. Is that believable, George?
I think it is, but I don't think it's quite as crazy as it seems. I think this week we got serious in a way. That is, when the recovery seemed, such as it was, and it wasn't much, seemed to stall. And you had unemployment increasing in 10 of the 11 largest industrial states, all except Pennsylvania. Those 10 industrial states have 246 electoral votes, just 24 short of the total needed to win. So I think this helps a Democrat. It concentrates the country's mind on the seriousness of the issues, and hence I think hurts Mr. Perot.
I think that's right. And one of the things we are seeing in the polling is still all within margin of error, but the more people learn about Perot, which they've learned a great deal in the last few weeks, as we've all started learning about him, that the less they like him. And that is a problem for him. Now, obviously, he hasn't started his counterattack, and he has a whole lot of money to do that with. But I think that as people really start to say, wait, this election counts, this can matter, that at that point they start going back to the two parties. And, of course, the president's counting on them to, at that point, go back and say, gee, it really matters, we better keep him in the White House.
I agree with all that and much more. I think there's a lot of different factors involved in this election year. One of them is this is the year of the grouch. We were talking earlier this year about the politics of resentment. It's gotten much worse. People are just grouchy now. I mean, there's not really a consensus on answers or on issues. Everyone has their gripe. I think Ross Perot has benefited from that. But now, as he tries to answer these gripes, come up with some kind of programs or ideas, there's no there, at least at this point. I think this is how Bill Clinton's gotten an advantage.
If you were worried about losing your job, wouldn't you be grouchy? I'm sure you
Absolutely. We should all be happy that we're employed today.
Perot talks a great deal about process, and what people are concerned about are the nuts and bolts, such as jobs. So how do you think why is he doing so well?
Again, you know, we went through a primary campaign where Pat Buchanan, a name not recently on many lips, he got in what, New Hampshire, 37%. It turned out he got 37% even when he wasn't there, when he was uncommitted. That is, there's a group out there that's unhappy at any point.
And Jerry Brown, same idea.
That's right.
Same thing on the Democratic side. A third of the people in both parties, people who are willing, the very few people who are willing to go out and vote in party primaries, a third of them on each side saying, throw everybody out. We don't want anybody who's there. And Ross Perot is benefiting from that now. I think that that's really the case. But Clarence is talking about that grouch factor. One of the things that struck me in John Martin's piece at the beginning of the program was a guy saying, I'm a good guy, you know, I've done everything right. And I think that's what we're really seeing this election year. People who say, you know, I've done everything right. I've worked hard all my life. I've gone to school. I've paid my taxes. I've educated my children and brought them up right. And I'm out of work, and I can't expect their future to be any better than my present. And that's what's making people so mad.
And that's why you've got support for Perot from the right and the left. That's the unusual phenomena this year, that this grouch factor is passed along, whether it was David Duke, Pat Buchanan, Jerry Brown, or Paul Tsongas, or now Ross Perot. It's just passed along. People are not in agreement on what the answers ought to be, but they want something.
Well, the 4th of July weekend is maybe a good time to raise a sort of broad general question that the American people seem to be unhappy, discontent, dyspeptic, worried. Why? George, what do you make of it?
Well,
have we come to some kind of turning point in our country's history?
I don't think so. We've gone through the most profound mood swing in our history. In 15 months, from the bombing of Baghdad to the burning of Los Angeles, we went from giddy and unrealistic triumphalism over beating a country in a war that has a gross national product the size of Kentucky, to despair, quite irrational despair over the problems, real though they are, but not consuming and not nation-threatening problems in the city. It's a very strong country, healthy country, industrious, educated, doing all right. It's got some problems.
But people don't feel like anything that they were raised with counts anymore, and that's one of the reasons the administration does so well on the family values issue. But it also works at the workplace. If in the old days you were credited for working 25 years, 30 years, 40 years for one institution, and that institution valued you for being there for a long time, now people come in, new managers come in, they're credited with as many heads as they can slice off, as many bodies as they can remove, and that makes them good guys in the eyes of their bosses, the stockholders. And so it really makes people feel very uncertain about their jobs and feel like no matter what they do, no matter how hard they work, no matter how much they play by the rules, they're not safe. And that makes the country very uncomfortable.
Is that because our industries and our business have competitors unlike any they ever had before?
That's part of
foreign countries?
Two things are happening that haven't gotten enough attention. One is this is the first post-Cold War election, and people are wondering, where's their peace dividend? We're not worried about the bomb or the button this time, and people want to see some new ideas. Secondly, we are engaged in an economic restructuring right now. It is true, we have had economic growth for the last quarter or so, and yet people are still losing jobs. That's something we're not accustomed to in this country, and that's something that people want some sort of answer to, and they have a right to be dyspeptic about it.
And they want some leadership, and that's the other thing that everybody's feeling, that nobody's providing any leadership, and for a minute there, Ross Perot looked like he might be. I mean, if President Bush had come out after the riots, or if he had come out after the war, and taken this enormous political capital after that war and said, okay, now we're going to do it at home, domestic storm. If he had done that after the riots, I think he would have had tremendous support.
I don't agree. I think he'd have been laughed out of school because this is a government that has a hard enough time delivering a postcard or patching the potholes. When the more government fails at the basic functions, the grander become its objectives, like domestic Marshall plans and all the rest. I think what Americans want is not grand leadership. They want their children to walk down safe streets, like no gunfire, to get to schools that assign reasonable homework and have reasonable codes of discipline and all that. They're not asking an awful lot. They're asking what they used to have, what government should do, the fundamentals, not anything as elaborate as a domestic
Marshall. I think that's what it would provide.
Where'd all that go?
Yeah.
We don't have what we had when we were children.
This is true.
Where did it all go?
If I may interrupt, it should surprise no one that I disagree with George on that point. I think that for the last 12 years or so, we've been fed the idea that government is the enemy. It's better to have government uninvolved. I like the 60s in terms of a fundamental value that government can be your friend. The government can do things to improve people's lives. Back then, we had some hope. There is no hope in that regard these days. That we have cynicism to replace it. And I think this is a very dreary time for America.
I have a warm feeling about the 60s because it gave us the conservative era in reaction to the 1960s.
And the Goldwater defeat of 64.
That's exactly right. That was part of the process. But it does seem to me that it was in the 1960s that the government said a good society is just not good enough. We're going to have a great society. And ever since then, the essentials have been, I think, not keeping pace.
Well, a number of us benefited from that period and have reason to feel good about it. I feel sad for young people today coming out of college who don't have any jobs and don't have much in the way of ideals or direction. Our generation should be passing something on to them, and we're not doing it.
Now, before we run out of time, which is not far away, I want to bring up the question of the Supreme Court's ruling on abortion last Monday. Cokie, what do you think of it?
I think it was the perfect ruling. The court basically came down exactly where the American people are, which is that it said abortion should remain legal, but that reasonable restrictions can apply, and the political process will determine those state by state. It's exactly what most Americans believe.
George, you agree with that?
It's a good position, as Cokie says, for a politician to take. It's intellectually incoherent and scandalous for a Supreme Court to take. It has no grounding in constitutional law, and it sets the stage for another 2 decades of litigation while Sandra Day O'Connor and the other moderates, as they're called, because they're faithful to a tradition now of extremism on this issue, will continue fine-tuning and writing an abortion code.
I was wondering how the courts are going to somehow justify or bring together all the disparate views in this country. Sandra Day O'Connor's view that the law should not impose an undue burden on a woman seeking an abortion is a very interesting way to resolve the issue for now, but open up another can of worms, of course, for future court.
The 24-hour waiting period is not an undue burden. Presumably, Germany's 3-day waiting period, Germany has just passed an abortion law viewed in Europe as very liberal, less liberal than the Pennsylvania law. Now we're going to have to litigate, and Sandra Day O'Connor will consult herself and not the Constitution, which is quite silent on the issue, as to whether or not 48 hours is too long. It's a ridiculous way to make laws.
It's certainly thrown it back into the political process as well as the judicial process, not only at the state level, but Justice Blackmun's statement that it was just him standing between overturning Roe and not overturning Roe.
Well,
I think that it now becomes a presidential issue.
Quite possibly not the last word on the topic, but we have run out of time. Thank you all. Clarence, nice having you.
Great to be here.
We'll be back with a few words about exactly what is or is not a public servant in a moment.
It's called the ripple effect. The way one isolated action can set so many others in motion. You see it in nature, and you can see it in this country's economy, too. When we export our precious resources in their raw form, the benefits are fleeting and few. But when they're processed first and given added value, the momentum is undeniable. productivity increases. Our balance of trade grows ever stronger. And wave after wave of new jobs is created. Not just in processing, but in everything from transportation to financial services, packaging to construction. In fact, studies predict that if just 10% more of our agricultural exports were traded as value-added products, 100,000 new jobs would be created, personal income would swell by more than $2 billion, and gross output would grow by an additional $5 billion. All within these shores.
Risk. As hard as it is to live with, it's impossible to live without. At Merrill Lynch, we know that risk can be dealt with. It can be managed. It can even be turned to your advantage. To do that, you need a partner. A partner who understands it and can help you turn a world of risk into a world of opportunity. Merrill Lynch, we're bullish on the future.
We'll be back after these messages.
The rush is on for the incomparable new GE Profile refrigerator. The GE Profile is full of smart ideas, like a shelf that tucks away for tall things, and shelves that glide out so you can find things. It's called Smart Space Design. Smart ideas that let you put things in, take things out, and clean things up so quickly and easily that you'll never again miss your favorite commercials.
We bring good things to life.
During the 30s depression, the WPA created millions of jobs and rebuilt America.
This nation is asking for action, and action now.
Do we need it again today?
Right now, the current system is failing everybody.
Watch Peter Jennings on ABC's World News Tonight this week.
Finally, on the 4th of July weekend, every big city airport in the country is jammed to capacity and beyond, and the difficulty begins even before you enter the terminal. The first and usually biggest difficulty is finding a place to park, and Washington's National Airport is among the worst. Unless, of course, you are a member of Congress, the Supreme Court, or a diplomat. If so, there's a whole big parking lot, the lot closest to the terminal, kept open and waiting just for you, and it's all free. Here is the free lot before the 4th of July weekend, almost empty. Supreme Court members use it very little. There are only 9 of them. Diplomats use it some, but mostly it's the 535 members of Congress and their staffs who also park here free. Now, here's the free lot yesterday on the 4th. Every space filled, overflowing, parking on the sidewalks. Again, all free. While private persons, sometimes called taxpayers, make do as best they can. It does give new meaning to the term public servant, doesn't it? I mean, who is the servant and who is being served? For all of us here at ABC News, until next week, thank you.
This week with David Brinkley, brought to you by GE. From satellites to medical systems, we bring good things to life. And by ADM, supermarket to the world. If you wish a transcript, send $5 to 1535 Grant Street, Denver, Colorado, 80203.
This Week with David Brinkley is a presentation of ABC News. More Americans get their news from ABC News than from any other source.
Sunday, somebody's killing all the good men.
You asked me if Michael had any enemies.
Mary Lou Henner, Leslie Ann Down. No man is safe from lady killers.
Hi, I'm Jack Nicklaus, and I'll be defending my national crown against some of the greatest names in the game. It's the U.S. Senior Open, live Saturday on ABC Sports.
In a flash, the storm hits.
We got one lady out, and then the other lady took that.
When severe weather strikes, you need instant information. Get it with Channel 5 First Warning Weather. Only Channel 5 can show you where lightning strikes. Only Channel 5 has exclusive lightning forecasts in every weather channel. And only Channel 5 has weather updates every hour. And first warnings anytime severe weather strikes. Channel 5 First Warning Weather. Weather you can count on.
I will ask the other side 6 years ago.
The only place for prudent, funded...